16. She'd forgotten about dinner until minutes before Cade knocked. There'd barely been time to wash her face and repair the damage from the crying jag and what had followed it, and no time at all to think of an acceptable excuse to send him away. She couldn't get her mind around it. The bout with tears had left her hollow, head and body. The swing back into Hope's past brought both uneasiness and sorrow. And a thrill. That was the oddest part of it, she admitted. This lingering thrill of that first solo ride, the sheer delight of wobbling down that lovely shade-dappled lane with Cade running beside her. The way his eyes, so blue, so bright, laughed into hers. The love she'd felt for him, the innocent love of a sister, still shimmered through her and mixed dangerously, she knew, with her own emotions that were very adult and had nothing to do with kinship. The combination made her vulnerable to herself and to him. Better, wiser, to be alone until it passed. She'd tell him she was exhausted, too tired to eat. That, at least, would be the truth. He was a reasonable man. Almost too reasonable, she told herself. He'd understand and let her be. When she opened the door, he was standing there holding a casserole dish. Neighbors, she thought, brought food for death. Well, she was dead on her feet, so it seemed appropriate enough. Lila sent this. He stepped in, handed it over. She said anyone who worked as hard as you shouldn't have to cook on top of it. You're instructed to put this in the freezer and pull it out the next time you come home and just need to sit and put your feet up. Which, he added as he continued to study her face, looks like tonight. Yes, she thought, almost too reasonable. I hadn't realized how geared up I was about today. Now that it's over, I'm limp. You've been crying. Delayed reaction. Relief. She carried the dish into the kitchen to put it away, then wondered what to do next. I'm sorry about tonight. It was a nice idea, going out to celebrate. Maybe in a couple of days we could... She turned, all but bumped into him, then backed hard against the counter. There was a rough and ready jolt of lust. From her, from him. She couldn't be sure. You had a lot to deal with today. He didn't give her room. He figured he'd already given her plenty. He simply laid his palms on the counter on either side of her, caged her in. He saw her awareness of the move in her eyes, the wariness. A lot of people and the memories they bring along with them. Yes, she started to shift, realized there wasn't anywhere to go. It was her blood that was hot, she thought with some embarrassment. Running hot, fast, and greedy. It seemed like memories were shooting out like pebbles from a slingshot, she said, and had ultimately taken her down. All of them painful. No, oh God, she thought, don't touch me. But even as she thought it, his hands were on her shoulders, running down her arms. Everything inside her body began to pulse. It was wonderful to see Lila and Will Hanson. He looks just like his father now. When I was a little girl, old Mr. Hanson used to give me great knee-high on credit if I was a few pennies short. I often was. Cade, his name was almost a plea. She couldn't have said for what. She was trembling. The little jumps under his palms were wonderfully arousing. I like the way you look today, all tidy and crisp, all calm and cool on the outside. Always makes me wonder what's going on under the surface. I was nervous. It didn't show, not the way it's showing now. Defenses down, Tori. I want them down. I'm going to take advantage of it. Cade, I've got nothing in me. Then why are you trembling? He tugged the band from her hair, heard the quick catch in her breathing. His eyes stayed on hers, watching the irises darken as he combed his spread fingers through her hair and unwound the neat braid. Why aren't you stopping me? Was that her knees going weak? She'd forgotten that could be such a lovely sensation. Surrender wasn't always weakness. I'm thinking about it. He smiled then, a lazy slide of amusement with power at the edges. You just keep right on thinking. I'll keep right on taking advantage. He undid the first button of her shirt, then the second. He'd taught Hope to ride a bike, she thought. He'd only been 10 years old and already man enough to care. He'd sent flowers today, the right flowers, because he'd known they'd please her. Now he was touching her as she hadn't been touched in so long. I'm out of practice. He flipped the third button open. Thinking? No. Her breath came out on a shaky laugh. I'm very good at thinking most of the time. Then think about this. He gave her shirt a little tug to pull it from the waistband of her slacks. I want to touch you. I want to feel your skin under my hands, like this. He skimmed them up her sides, down. Her stomach quivered when he unhooked her slacks. No, keep your eyes open. He leaned forward, caught her chin in his teeth. A brief nip that shot an ache down the center of her body. "Since you're out of practice, I'll just guide you through, and I want you looking at me when I touch you." Look straight ahead, he'd told Hope, and had steadied her. "I want to look at you," she told him. He lowered the zipper slowly, knuckles grazing against her. Her own low moan echoed like thunder in her ears. It had been so long since a man had wanted her, since a man had made her want. She wanted to tense, go rigid at the thought of the invasion, of privacy, of self, but her body was already yearning. "Step out," he murmured when her slacks pooled at her feet. As she blinked to open her mouth to speak, he simply covered it with his. Gentle and warm, somehow reassuring even as the edge of something reckless shimmered at the edges. Then his arms were around her, sliding and skimming over her back as he circled her, a kind of seductive waltz toward the doorway. Nerves chased after the heat that rose to her skin. "Cade, I want to take you in the light." She was already his. No barrier of doubt would stop him. "So I can see you when you're under me, when I'm inside you." At the door of the bedroom, he lifted her. "There are all manner of things I've imagined doing to you in this bed. Let me." The sun streamed rich and gold with the spring evening. It washed over the bed, over her face as he laid her down. The mattress gave under his weight, and he linked his fingers with hers. Restraint and unity, and watching her, always watching her, he took her mouth. Slowly at first, and sweetly until her hands relaxed under his, until her lips softened, parted, invited. He felt her heartbeat begin to slow, begin to thicken, and as she opened for him, he changed the texture and set to ravage. The sudden demand stabbed into her, shocking the senses, scraping the nerves. She arched as heat balled in her belly and the groan strangled in her throat. He aroused her to shudders with his mouth. He didn't want her to anticipate, wanted all her senses stunned and her mind empty of all but pleasure. She would think of him, only of him. He would see to it. When she was steeped in him finally, he would have her. Her body was slender, the muscles surprisingly firm, almost tough, with delicate skin a delightful contrast. He indulged himself in the taste of it, while part of him calculated how to exploit those nerves and destroy every barrier. He dragged her up, hands rough, grip near to bruising, ripping another gasp from her as her head fell back, her hair tumbled. Then he used his fingertip to nudge the straps of her bra over each shoulder. He danced his fingers lightly over the swell. With his thumb circled her nipples through the cotton. "Is it coming back to you yet?" Her head was so heavy, her skin so hot. "What?" "Good." He unhooked her bra, drew it aside. But when she reached for him, he pressed her hands flat on the bed, sliding them back until her elbows locked. "I want you to take this time. Take until you can't take any more. Then you'll let go, and you'll give. Everything." His mouth all but savaged hers, ripping down to her gut with one jagged and panicked thrill. She wanted to resist, to push him back before he dragged her over a line she'd sworn never to cross again. But then his mouth was on hers again, the scrape of teeth, the flick of tongue whipping hot points of pleasure into her. Her back arched, willful invitation, and her hips began to rock. Little cries and whimpers, she couldn't bite them back. Her arms trembled from the strain even as her body gloried in it. Something frantic was clawing inside her, fighting to break free. A fast, hard orgasm shocked her eyes wide, left her stunned and embarrassed. Then he was pulling her against him, wrapping her close. "Let go." He rolled her back on the bed, tugging off his shirt. Her eyes were blurred now, her breath as ragged as his. This time, when she reached for him, he slid into her arms. His mouth was urgent, his hands impatient as they molded and pressed and stroked. She dragged at his trousers, desperate now that nerves had been swallowed by needs. He stripped them aside, then sent her flying when he yanked up her hips and used his mouth on her. Her hands locked around the rungs of the bed as he'd once imagined. Her head whipped to the side as sensations, dark delights, swamped her. His taste, his scent flooded her senses, swelled them until there was nothing else. Her breath sobbed out an instant before her long, mindless cry of release. Even as her hands went limp, he locked his around them. His heart was pounding, a rage of blood. The last lights of day and the dying breeze of evening brushed her face. Her hair was a wild mass over the pillows, her cheeks flushed. He would remember this, always, and so, he promised himself, would she. Open your eyes, Tori, look at me. When her lids fluttered up, he clung to the last link of control, bent his head, kissed her long, deep. Say my name. The pressure had built again, the terrible, glorious heat of it. Cade. Say it again. Her fingers flexed under his. She wanted to weep or scream. Cade. Again, and plunged into her. Her mind went brilliant. She moved with him, matching each slow, smooth stroke, absorbing him, feeding on each individual sensation until they became one glorious feast. Cade, hot and hard inside her, the weight of him solid, strong. The spread soft and smooth on her back, the iron slick against her hands, and the last rays of light going gray with dusk. When the rhythm quickened, she was ready. She was eager and enraptured by the way his eyes, the stunning blue of them, remained fixed on hers. Stay with me. He was lost in her now, drowning in her now. His heart beat brutally against hers as he buried his face in her hair. With their hands still gripped, they let go. She'd never been taken over so completely, not by anyone, not even the man she'd loved. Tori imagined she should be worried about it, but at the moment she couldn't work up the energy for concerns and calculations. She lay under him while the air in the room softened in the twilight. For the first time in much, much too long to remember, she felt completely relaxed, body and mind. She had a hand tangled in his hair. It seemed all right to leave it there. When he turned his head and his lips brushed the side of her breast, she smiled at the lazy pleasure of it. I guess we celebrated after all, she murmured, and wondered if it would be terribly rude to slide into sleep just like this. We'll be sure to find a lot more to celebrate from now on. I've been wanting to get you here since I helped you cart this bed in. I know. Her eyes were nearly closed, but she felt him move his head again, felt him look at her. You weren't all that subtle about it. A lot more subtle than I wanted to be. He thought of how he'd imagined gilding their first time with music and candlelight. We did fine without them, she said sleepily. Without what? Without the music, and her eyes flew open, filled with horror, and met his considering ones. I'm sorry, She tried to push away, but the weight of him held her in place. What are you sorry for? I didn't mean to. She pressed her hands into the bed, gripped the spread, and was already beginning to shake. It won't happen again. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Read my mind? He shifted so that he could brace on his elbows and frame her face in his hands. Stop it. I will. I'm terribly sorry. No, damn it, Tori. Stop pulling in. Stop anticipating my reactions. And God damn it, stop wondering if and when I'm going to take a crack at you. He shifted to sit up, then lifted her to face him. Her cheeks had lost that rosy, contented glow and were pale. Her eyes looked strained, near to terrified. He hated it. Did it ever occur to you that there might be times a man wouldn't mind having a woman read his mind? It's an inexcusable breach of privacy. Yeah. To her shock, he rolled over and pulled her with him so she was sprawled over his chest. Seems to me a few minutes back the two of us breached each other's privacy pretty damn effectively. You want to snatch a stray thought out of my head, I'll let you know if it pisses me off. I don't understand you. You ought to have a pretty good clue since I'm lying here naked in your bed. He kept his voice deliberately careless. If that doesn't do it, take another look inside, see what you find. She didn't know whether to be insulted or horrified. It's not like that. No? Tell me what it's like then. When she shook her head, he cupped the back of her neck and began to rub. Tell me what it's like. I don't read minds. It doesn't happen by accident or hardly ever. It's just that we were very closely connected physically. I can't argue with that. And I was nearly asleep. Sometimes it can sneak up on you when you're drifting like that. You had an image in your head. It was a very clear, distinct thought, and it just came through. Candlelight, music playing, the two of us standing by the bed. I saw it in mine. So, what were you wearing? When her head snapped up, he shrugged. Never mind, I can think that one through for myself. You get images, pictures of thoughts. Sometimes. He looked so relaxed, so at ease. Where was his anger? God, you confuse me. Good, it'll keep you on your toes. Is that the way it always works? No. No, because if you have any decency, you don't go poking into someone else's private thoughts. I block them out. It's simple enough, as they only come through with effort anyway, or if there's a great deal of emotion on either side, or if I'm very tired. All right. Then I'd say the next time we make love and you're drifting off to sleep, I better keep any fantasies about Meg Ryan out of my head. Meg... Baffled, Tori sat up again, automatically crossing an arm over her breasts. Meg Ryan. Wholesome, sexy, smart. Cade opened his eyes. Seems to be my type. He cocked his head, studied her. Just trying to picture you as a blonde. It could work. I'm not going to be a party to some prurient fantasy you've cooked up about a Hollywood actress. Miffed, she started to climb off the bed and found herself flat on her back again and under him. Oh, come on, darling, just this once. No! God, you giggled. Meg, she's got this sexy little giggle. He nipped Tori's shoulder. Now I'm excited. Get off me, you idiot. I can't. He rushed wild kisses over her face, foolish and sweet as a puppy. I'm a victim of my own helpless fantasies. Giggle again, I'm begging you. No, but she did. Don't you even think about Jesus. Her laughing struggles stopped as he slid silkily inside her. Her hips arched up and her hands gripped his hips. Don't you dare call me Meg. He lowered his head, chuckling, as he took her. They ate Lila's casserole and washed it down with wine, and tumbled back into bed with the eagerness and energy that fuels new lovers. They made love at moonrise with the light shining silver over their joined bodies, then slept with the windows open to a fitful breeze and the ripe green scents of the marsh. He's coming back. Hope sat cross-legged on the porch of the Marsh house, the porch that hadn't been there when she'd been alive. She tossed her handful of silver jacks, then began bouncing the little red ball, while her hand darted deft and quick, plucking the star-shaped metal. He's watching. Who? Who is he watching? Tori was 8 again, her thin face wary, her legs bruised. He likes to hurt girls. She scooped up the last jack, tossed them again. It makes him feel big, important. Twosies. In that same steady rhythm, she began snatching up pairs. He hurt other girls, too, not just you. Not just me, Hope agreed. You already know. Threesies. Jacks clattered, the ball thumped methodically on wood. A light breeze danced by, twined up with the scent of rambling roses and honeysuckle. You already know. Like when you saw the little boy's picture that time, you knew. I can't do that anymore. Inside the child's chest, Tori's heart began to swell and bump. I don't want to do that anymore. You came, Hope said simply, and moved on to foursies. You have to be careful, not to go too fast, not to go too slow, she continued as she swiped a set of 4 and nipped the ball on the bounce. Or you lose your turn. Tell me who he is, Hope. Tell me where to find him. I can't. She swept for another set and knocked a finger against another jack, sent it spinning. Oops. She looked over at Tori with clear eyes. It's your turn now. Be careful. Tori's eyes shot open. Her heart was knocking against her ribs and her hand was curled into a tight fist. So tight she was nearly surprised that a little red ball didn't roll out when she spread her aching fingers. It was full dark now. The moon had set and left the world black and thick. The little breeze had gone with it, so the air was still, hushed. She heard an owl and the shrill bell sound of peepers. She heard Cade's steady breathing in the dark beside her and realized she'd moved to the edge of the bed as far from him as was possible. No contact in sleep, she thought. The mind was too vulnerable then to permit the luxury of casual snuggling. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed into the kitchen. At the sink she ran water until it chilled, then filled a tumbler. The dream had given her a desperate thirst, and had reminded her why she had no business sleeping with Kincaid Lavelle. His sister was dead, and if she wasn't responsible, she was obligated. She'd felt obligated before and had followed through. The path she'd taken had brought her great joy and shattering grief. She'd slept with another man then, given herself out of careless and innocent love. When she'd lost him, lost everything, she'd promised herself she'd never make those choices, those mistakes, again. Yet here she was, opening herself to all that pain a second time. Cade was the kind of man women fell in love with, the kind she could fall in love with. Once that step was taken, it colored everything you thought, everything you did and felt, in the bold hues of joy, in the drowning grays of despair. So the step couldn't be taken, not again. She would have to be sensible enough to accept the physical attraction, enjoy the results of it, and keep her emotions separate and controlled. What else had she done nearly all of her life? Love was a reckless, dangerous thing. There was always something lurking in the shadows, greedy and spiteful, just waiting to snatch it away. She lifted the glass to her lips and saw. Beyond the window, beyond the dark, in the shadows, she thought dully, waiting, and the glass slipped from her fingers to shatter in the sink. "Tori!" Cade shot out of sleep, out of bed, and stumbled in the dark. Cursing, he rushed toward the kitchen. She stood under the harsh light, both hands at her throat, staring at the window. Someone's in the dark. "Tori!" He saw the sparkle of broken glass that had jumped from the sink to the floor. He grabbed her hands. "Are you cut?" "Someone's in the dark," she said again, in a voice much like a child. "Watching, from the dark. He's been here before, and he'll come back again." Her eyes stared into Cade's, through them, and all she saw were shadows, silhouettes. What she felt was cold, so much cold. "He'll have to kill me. I'm not the one, but he'll have to because I'm here. It's my fault, really. Anybody could see that. If I'd come with her that night, he'd have just watched, like he'd done before. He'd have just watched and imagined doing it. Just imagined until he got hard and used his hands so he could feel like a man." Her knees went out from under her, but she protested as Cade swept her up. "I'm all right. I just need to sit down." "Lie down," he corrected. When he put her back on the bed, he hunted up his trousers. "You stay in here." "Where are you going?" The sudden terror of being left alone brought strength back to her knees. She leaped up. "You said someone was outside. I'm going to look." "No." Now the fear was all for him. "It's not your turn." "What?" She held up both hands and sank down onto the mattress. "I'm sorry. My mind's confused. He's gone, Cade. He's not out there now. He was watching, earlier, when we were—" It made her queasy. "When we were making love, he watched." Grimly, Cade nodded. "I'll look anyway." "You won't find him," she murmured as Cade strode out. But he wanted to. He wanted to find someone and use his fists, use his fury. He switched on the outside light, scanned the area washed in pale yellow. He walked to his truck, got a flashlight out of his toolbox, and the knife he kept there. Armed, he circled the house, sweeping the light over the ground into the shadows. Near the bedroom window, where the grass needed trimming, he crouched beside a flattened area where a man might have stood. Son of a bitch. He hissed it between his teeth, and his hand tightened on the hilt of the knife. He straightened, spun around to stalk into the marsh. He stood on the verge and strained against impotence. He could go in, thrash around, work off some of his anger, and by doing so leave Tori alone. Instead, he went back inside, left the knife and flashlight on the kitchen table. She still sat there, her fists bunched on her knees. She lifted her head when he came in, but said nothing. She didn't have to. "What we did together in here was ours," Cade said. "He doesn't change that." He sat beside her, took her hand. "He can't if we don't let him." He made it dirty. "For him, not for us. Not for us, Tori," he murmured, and turned her face to his. She sighed once, touched the back of his hand with her fingers. "You're so angry. How do you tie it up that way?" "I kicked my truck a couple of times." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Will you tell me what you saw?" His anger, blacker than yours could ever be, but not, I don't know how to explain, not substantial, not real. And a kind of pride. I don't know, maybe it's more a satisfaction. I can't see it, see him. I'm not the one he wants, but he can't let me stay. He can't trust me this close to hope. I don't know if those are my thoughts or his. She squeezed her eyes shut, shook her head. I can't get him clear. It's as if something's missing, in him or in me. I don't know, but I can't see him. It wasn't a drifter who killed her, the way we thought all these years. No. She opened her eyes again, turned away from her own grief and toward his. It was someone who knew her, who watched her, us. I think I knew that even back then, but I was so afraid I closed it up. If I'd gone back the morning after, If I'd had the courage to go in with you and your father instead of telling you where she was, I might have seen. I can't be sure, but I might have. Then it would have been over. We don't know that, but we can start to end it now. We'll call the police. Cade, the police... Her throat wanted to close. It's very rare that even the most forward-thinking, open-minded cop listens to someone like me. I don't expect to find that particular breed here in Progress. Chief Russ might take some convincing, but he'll listen to you. Cade thought he would make sure of it. Why don't you get dressed? You're going to call him now at 4 in the morning? Yeah, Cade picked up the bedside phone. That's what he gets paid for. 17. Police Chief Carl D. Russ wasn't a big man. He'd reached the height of 5 feet 6 1/4 when he was 16 and had stayed plugged there. He wasn't a handsome man. His face was wide and pitted with his ears stuck on either side like oversized cup handles. His hair was as grizzled as a used-up scouring pad. He had a scrawny build and topped the scale at 130, fully dressed and soaking wet. His ancestors had been slaves, field workers. Later they'd been sharecroppers eking out stingy livings on another man's land. His mother had wanted more for him and had pushed, prodded, harangued, and browbeat until, mostly out of self-defense, he aimed for more. Carl D.'s mother enjoyed the fact that her boy was police chief nearly as much as he did. He wasn't a brilliant man. Information cruised into his brain, meandering about, taking winding paths and detours until it settled down into complete thoughts. He tended to be plodding. He also tended to be thorough. But above all, Carl D. was affable. He didn't bitch and moan about being awakened at 4 in the morning. He'd simply gotten up and dressed in the dark so as not to disturb his wife. He'd left her a note on the kitchen board and had tucked her latest honey-do list in his pocket on the way out. What he thought about Kincaid Lavelle being at Victoria Bodine's house at 4 in the morning he kept to himself. Cade met him at the door. "Thanks for coming, Chief." "Oh, well, that's all right." Carl D. chewed contentedly on the stick of big red gum he was never without since his wife had nagged him into quitting smoking. "Had yourself a prowler, did you?" "We had something. Let's take a look around the side, see what you think." "How's your family doing?" "They're fine, thanks. Heard your Aunt Rosie was down for a visit. You be sure to give her my best now." "I'll do that." Cade shone his flashlight on the grass under the bedroom window, waited while Carl D. did the same, and pondered. "Well, could be y'all had somebody standing there playing Peepin' Tom. Might have been an animal." He scanned with his light, chewed contemplatively. "It's a quiet spot, off the road a ways. Don't see that anybody'd have good cause to be wandering around out here. Guess they could come across from the road or out through the swamp. You get any kind of a look?" "No, I didn't see anything. Tori did. Guess I'll talk to her first, then do some poking around. Anybody was out here's hightailed it by now." He got creakily to his feet and swept his light over the darker shadows where the live oaks and tupelos closed in the swamp. "Yeah, this here's a quiet spot, all right. Couldn't pay me to live out this way. Bet you hear frogs and owls and such all blessed night long." "You get used to them," Cade said as they walked around to the back door. "You don't really hear them." "I guess that's the way. You get so's you don't hear the usual sounds anymore, and something that's not usual gives you kind of a jolt. Would you say that?" "I suppose I would, and no, I didn't hear anything." "Me, I'm what you call a light sleeper. Least little thing pops my eyes open. Now, Ida May, she won't stir if the bomb goes off." He stepped into the kitchen, blinked at the bright lights, then politely removed his cap. "Morning, Miss Bodine." "Chief Russ, I'm sorry for the trouble." "Don't you worry about that. Would that be coffee I smell?" "Yes, I just made it. Let me pour you a cup." "Sure would appreciate that." "Heard you had a nice turnout at your store today. My wife sure enjoyed herself. Got one of those wind chimes. Fussed about it the minute I got in the door. Nothing would do but I hang it up right off the bat. Makes a pretty sound." "Yes, they do. What would you like in your coffee?" "Oh, half a pound of sugar's all." He winked at her. "You don't mind, we'll sit down here and you can tell me about this prowler of yours." Tori shot Cade a look before she set out the coffee and sat. Someone was at the window, the bedroom window, while Cade and I were. Carl D. took out his notepad and one of the 3 chewed-up pencils in his pocket. "I know this is a mite awkward for you, Miss Bodine. You try to relax now. Did you get a look at the person at the window?" No, not really. I woke up and came into the kitchen for a drink of water. While I was standing at the sink, I He was watching the house, watching me, us. He doesn't want me here. He's stirred up that I came back." "Who?" "The same man who killed Hope Lavelle." Carl D. set his pencil down and, tucking his gum in the pocket of his cheek, picked up his coffee to sip. "How do you know that, Miss Bodine?" Oh, his tone was mild, she thought, but his eyes were the cool, flat eyes of a cop. She knew cops' eyes intimately. "The same way I knew where to find Hope the morning after she was killed. You were there." She knew her voice was belligerent, her posture defensive. She couldn't help it. "You weren't chief then." "No, I've only been chief for going on 6 years. Chief Tate, he retired, moved on down to Naples, Florida, got himself a motorboat, does a lot of fishing. Chief Tate, he was always one for fishing." Russ paused. "I was a deputy the summer little Hope Lavelle was murdered. Terrible thing. Worst thing ever happened around these parts. Chief Tate, he figured it was a drifter did what was done to that little girl. Never found any evidence to the contrary." "You never found anything," Torrey corrected. "Whoever killed her knew her, just like he knows me, and you and Cade. He knows progress. He knows the swamp. Tonight he came up to the window of my house. But you didn't see him. Not in the way you mean." Carl D. sat back, pursed his lips, considered. "My wife's granny, on her ma's side, holds whole conversations with dead relatives. Now, I'm not saying that's the true case, or that it's not, as I'm not the one having those chats. But in my job, Miss Bodine, it comes around to facts. The fact is, I knew what had happened to Hope and where she could be found. The man who killed her knows that. Chief Tate didn't believe me. He decided I'd been out there with her, then had run off when I got scared and left her there, or that I found her after she was dead and just went home and hid until morning." There was kindness in Carl D.'s eyes. He'd raised 2 girls of his own. "You were hardly more than a baby yourself." "I'm grown up now, and I'm telling you the man who killed Hope was out there tonight. He's killed others, at least one other. A young girl he picked up hitchhiking on the way to Myrtle Beach. He's already targeted someone else, not me. I'm not the one he wants." "You can tell me all this, but you can't tell me who he is." "No, I can't. I can tell you what he is. A sociopath who feels he has the right to do what he does because he needs it. Needs the excitement and the power of it. A misogynist who believes women are here to be used by men. A serial killer who has no intention of stopping or being stopped. He's had a run of 18 years, she said quietly. Why should he stop? I didn't handle that very well. Cade closed the back door, sat down at the table. He and Carl D. had walked the property, scouted the edges of the swamp. They'd found nothing, no fresh footprints, no handy torn swatch of material on a tree branch. "You told him what you know." "He doesn't believe me." "Whether he does or not, he'll do his job. Like they did their job 18 years ago." He said nothing for a moment. The reminder of that morning was always a quick, sharp stab to the gut. "Who are you blaming, Torrey? The cops or yourself?" "Both. No one believed me, and I couldn't explain myself. I was afraid to. I knew I'd be punished, and the more I said, the worse the punishment. In the end, I did what I could to save myself." "Didn't we all?" He pushed away from the table, went to the stove to pour coffee he didn't want. "I knew she was out of the house that night. Knew she planned to sneak out. I didn't say anything, not then, not the next day, not ever, about seeing her bike hidden. That night I considered it the code. You don't tattle unless you're going to get something out of it. So what if she wanted to ride off for a couple of hours?" He turned back to see Torrey watching him. "The next day when we found her, I didn't say anything. That was self-preservation. They'd blame me as much as I blamed myself. After a while, there just didn't seem to be a point. We were all missing a piece and could never get it back. But I can go back to that night, replay it in my head. Only this time I tell my father how Hope stashed her bike, and he locks it up and gives her one hell of a talking to. The next morning she wakes up safe in her bed. I'm sorry. Oh, Torrey, so am I. I've been sorry for 18 years, and over that time I've watched the sister I have left do whatever she could to ruin her life. I saw my father pull away from all of us as if being with us hurt more than he could stand, and my mother coat herself with layer on layer of bitterness and propriety, all because I was more interested in my own affairs than seeing to it Hope stayed in bed where she belonged. Cade, there would have been another night. There wouldn't have been that one. I can't fix it, Tori, and neither can you. I can find him. Sooner or later I will find him. Or he'll find me, she thought. He's already found me. I have no intention of standing by this time while someone else I care about takes foolish risks. He set the coffee aside. You need to pack some things. Go stay with your aunt and uncle. I can't do that. I have to stay here. I can't explain it to you except to say I have to stay here. If I'm wrong, there is no risk. If I'm right, it won't matter where I am. He wouldn't waste time arguing. He'd simply find a way to arrange it as he thought best. Then I'll pack a few things of my own. Excuse me? I'm going to be spending a lot of time here. It'll be more convenient to have what I need close at hand. Don't look so surprised. One night in bed doesn't make us lovers. But that, he said, pulling her to her feet, is what we're going to be. You're taking a lot for granted, Cade. I don't think so. He caught her face in his hands, kissed her, sliding her closer until her lips softened, warmed beneath his. I don't think I'm taking a thing for granted, most particularly you. Let's just say you get your feelings about things, Tori, things you know without being able to explain them. So do I. I've had one of those feelings about you, and I'm going to stick close until I can explain it. Attraction and sex aren't such a puzzle, Cade. They are when you haven't found and fit in all the connecting pieces. You let me in, Tori. You won't get me out again half as easy. It's a clever trick, how you manage to be annoying and comforting at the same time. She drew away. And I'm not sure I let you in at all. You just pretty much go where you please. True enough, and he wouldn't bother to deny it. Gonna try to kick me out? Doesn't look like it. Good, that saves us an argument. Well, since we're up and dressed, why don't we do some business? Business? I've got those samples out in the truck. I'll bring them in and we can negotiate. Tori glanced at the clock. It was still shy of 7. Why not? This time you make the coffee. Faith waited until 10:30 when she was certain both her mother and Lila had left for church. Her mother had long since given up expecting Faith to attend Sunday services, but Lila was bull-headed about God and often considered herself his drill sergeant, whipping the troops out of bed and into church with threats of eternal damnation. Whenever she was home, Faith was careful to hide, and hide well on Sunday mornings. She made up for it by occasionally putting on a demure dress and presenting herself in the kitchen so Lila could shuffle her off toward redemption. But this particular Sunday she wasn't in the mood to be obliging or to sit on a hard pew and listen to a sermon. She wanted to sulk over a breakfast bowl of chocolate ice cream and remind herself what bastards men were. When she thought of all the trouble she'd gone through for Wade Mooney, she could just spit. Hadn't she slathered herself all over with perfumed cream, slithered into the sexiest lingerie money could buy, and would have been perfectly willing for him to rip those bits of satin and lace right off her body, too. She dug out 4-inch heels and had strapped herself in an excuse for a little black dress that shouted, "I want a sin." She'd raided the wine cellar for 2 bottles that cost more than a college education, and when Cade found out, he was going to skin her for it. And when she'd arrived at Wade's, primed, polished, and perfumed, he hadn't had the decency to be home. Bastard. Worse, she'd waited for him. She'd tidied up his bedroom like a little housefrau, had lighted candles, put on music, then had damn near nodded off during the vigil. She'd waited another hour till almost 1 in the morning, primed for a different purpose. Oh, how she'd wanted him to walk in the door so she could have kicked his inconsiderate ass all the way back down the steps. It was his fault she'd gotten half drunk on the wine, and certainly his that due to the alcohol content in her blood she'd misjudged the turn through the gates and scraped the side of her car. So it was absolutely his fault that she was sitting there on a Sunday morning miserably hungover and stuffing ice cream in her face. She never wanted to see him again. In fact, she thought she would just give up men altogether. They weren't worth the time and trouble they drained out of a woman. She'd just cut them out of her life and find other areas of interest. Cade walked in the door as Faith was digging her spoon back into the half-gallon carton, and since he knew what mood dictated that particular behavior, tried to slip right out again. But he wasn't quite quick enough. "Oh, sit down. I'm not going to bite you." She lighted a cigarette, then proceeded to smoke with one hand and eat with the other. Everybody's gone off to church to save their immortal souls. Aunt Rosie went with Lila, I think. She likes to go to Lila's church more than she does Mama's. I caught a glimpse of them as they were leaving. Aunt Rosie had a hat on big as a turkey platter and lime green tennis shoes, so she couldn't be going with Mama. Sorry, I missed it. He got a spoon, sat, and scooped out some ice cream. So, what's wrong? Why should anything be wrong? I'm just as content as a goose with a nest of golden eggs." She blew out smoke, narrowed her eyes against it, and took a good look at him. His hair was a little damp, so the gilt edges of it stood out. That meant a recent shower, since Cade never bothered to do more than rub a towel over his hair to dry it off after one. His eyes, blue as her own, were lazily content, his lips quirked in a half-assed smile. She knew just what sort of activity put that look on a man's face. "You haven't changed clothes since yesterday. Haven't been home, have you? Well, I guess somebody got lucky last night." Cade licked his spoon, studied her in turn, "And I guess somebody didn't. I'm not going to sit here and discuss my sex life over your breakfast ice cream." "You and Tori Bodine, isn't that just perfect?" "I like it." Cade scraped out another spoonful. "Don't get in the way of this, Faith." "Why should I? What do I care? Just don't know what you see in her is all. She's pretty enough, but she's got a coolness around her. Sooner or later she'll freeze you out. She's not made the way the rest of us are." "You'd find out differently if you took time to get to know her. She could use a friend, Faith." "Well, don't look at me. I make a lousy friend. You can ask anyone. And I don't even much like her. You want to bang her a few times, that's your business." "Hey!" She looked up full of surprised insult when he grabbed her wrists, thumped their joined hands to the table. "It's not like that." His voice had gone soft as silk, and there was the warning gleam of temper in his eyes. "Sex isn't a casual pastime to everyone." "You're hurting me." "No, you're hurting yourself." He let her go, then rose to toss his spoon in the sink. Thoughtfully, Faith rubbed her wrist. "What I'm doing is making damn sure I'm not hurt. You want to lay your heart out so somebody can stomp on it, that's fine for you, but I'll tell you one thing I know for sure. You don't want to be falling in love with Tori. That's something that's never going to work." "I don't know whether I want to or not. I don't know whether it'll work or not." He turned back. "What you don't seem to know, Faith, is how much you're like her. The two of you barricaded against your own feelings in case, just on the off chance, that something might sting. She does it by closing in and you do it by acting out, but it's the same damn thing." "I'm nothing like her." She shouted it at him as he walked from the room. "I'm nothing like anybody but myself." Furious, she heaved her spoon across the room and, leaving the ice cream melting on the table, stormed upstairs to dress. She had to take it out on somebody, and since, through the maze of her thinking, it all stemmed back to Wade, he was elected. She dressed for this bout, too. She had her pride and wanted to look stunning when she skewered him straight through the heart, ripped him into little pieces, then dumped him and danced away singing a happy tune. She wore silk, tailored and trim in a deep blue to bring out her eyes and make him remember them. She started to shove open the door to his apartment, stopped herself, and knocked formally. She heard yips and whines on the other side and rolled her eyes. He'd brought one of his sick mutts upstairs. How had she ever let herself get to this stage with a man who thought more of a stray dog than he did of a woman willing to jump his bones? Thank God she'd come to her senses. Then he opened the door, rumpled, sleepy-eyed, wearing only jeans he hadn't bothered to button, and she remembered how she'd gotten to this stage with this particular man. Her juices wanted to rise and churn, but she ignored them and, grabbing his hand, slapped the key into it. "What?" "That's for starters. I have a few things to say to you, then I'll take my leave." She shoved him aside and strode in. She'd worn heels that showed off her legs in the short dress, just to torment him. "What time is it?" She gritted her teeth. He was simply destroying her timing. "It's nearly noon." "Oh, Christ, it can't be. I have to be at my mother's in an hour." He sank into a chair, buried his head in his hands. "I'll probably be dead in an hour." "You will if I have anything to do with it." She leaned down, sniffed, reared back. "You smell like the inside of a cheap bottle of bourbon." "It was an expensive bottle of bourbon, and I'm not inside it. It's inside me." His stomach rolled uneasily, for the moment. "So," she slapped her hands on her hips, "you were out getting drunk and tomcatting around half the night. I hope you enjoyed yourself." "I'm not entirely sure. I think I started out that way." "Because," she continued, furious at the interruption, "that's how you can spend every Saturday night from now on, as far as I'm concerned." Jealousy veered in and cut pride off at the pass. Who the hell was she? Who? He took a chance and let go of his head. He was vaguely disappointed when it didn't roll off his shoulders. Who was who? "The little slut you think you can two-time me with and live?" She picked up the closest thing at hand, a small lamp, yanked the cord free and heaved it. The resulting crash had howls coming from the bedroom and brought Wade unsteadily to his feet. You son of a bitch, is she still here?" "Who? What the hell's wrong with you? You broke my lamp." "I'll break your neck before I'm done." She whirled, raced into the bedroom, intending to rake the eyes out of the woman who'd usurped her place. On the bed stood a small black puppy, barking wildly and cowering against the pillows. "Where is she?" "Who?" Wade threw up his hands. His hair was standing on end, and there was a kickboxer working out behind each of his eyes. "Where is who? What the hell are you talking about, Faith?" "The bitch you're sleeping with." "The only bitch I've slept with recently besides you is that one." He gestured toward the bed. "And she's only been here a couple of hours. Really, she means nothing to me." "You think you can joke about this? Just where were you last night?" "I was out, goddammit." He stalked to the bathroom, shoving bottles and tubes aside as he searched for aspirin in the medicine chest. "You were out all right. I came by at 9 and stayed till nearly 1. Damn it. She hadn't meant to tell him she'd waited so long. You never showed up." Ready to whimper, he shook out 4 pills, swallowed them with tepid tap water. "I don't recall us having plans for last night. You don't like to make plans. Ties you down, takes the excitement out of things." He leaned back on the sink, stared at her balefully. "Well, this is exciting." "It was Saturday night. You had to know I'd come by." "No, Faith, I don't have to know anything. You don't want me to know anything." She tossed her head. They were getting off the subject. "I want to know where you were and who you were with." "That's a lot of demands from someone who doesn't want any strings." His eyes might have throbbed like drums, but they could still go hard. "Straight sex, fun and games, aren't those the ground rules?" "I don't cheat," she said with some dignity. "When I'm with a man, I don't go off with another. I expect the same consideration." "I wasn't with another woman. I was with Dwight." "Oh, that's just a bullshit lie. Dwight Fraser's a married man, and he wasn't out half the night drinking and carousing with you." "I don't know where he was after about 10. Home tucked in with Lissy, I expect. They went to the movies, and I tagged along." His voice had gone flat, his eyes cold and dull. "They went home. I bought a bottle. I went for a drive. I got drunk. I came home. If I'd done anything else, with anyone else, I'd have been free to do so, same as you are. That's the way you wanted it." "I never said that." "You never said different." "I'm saying different now." "You can't have it all your way, Faith. You want to change things. You want it to be you and me, then we start adding some of my rules." "I didn't say anything about rules." He was twisting things, she thought, just like a man. "I'm speaking of common courtesy." "And that means I sit around here and wait till you're in the mood for my company? I don't think so. We both come and go as we please unless we're pleased to be together. Or we make this a relationship. No more sneaking in here or off to some motel. No more pretending we're not involved. We're either a couple or we're not." "You're making ultimatums?" Her voice snapped at the end, a whiplash of shock. "You're making them to me after you kept me waiting here half the night?" "Frustrating, isn't it? The waiting pisses you off." He pushed away from the sink and walked toward her. "Makes you feel used and sorry and hurt." "I know." Stymied, she pushed a hand through her hair. "You never said anything about that." "You'd have taken off like a shot. That's your style, Faith. Sometime last night, while I was sitting down at the river with a bottle for company, it occurred to me that I didn't like that about you, and I didn't like it about myself that I let you be that way with me. So I'm telling you now. We try to make this work like people who give 2 damns about each other, or we walk away." "You know I care about you, Wade. What do you take me for?" It was more, he thought, what she took herself for. "There was a time I'd have taken you no matter what. That time's over. I want more now, Faith. If you can't give it to me or won't, I'll live with it. But I'm not settling for crumbs anymore." "I don't understand this." Shaken, she sat down on the edge of the bed. The puppy crawled toward her on her belly, sniffing. "I don't see how you can turn this around on me." "Not on you, on us. I want there to be an us, Faith. I'm in love with you." "What, are you crazy?" She leaped up again, panic in every pore. "Don't say that." "I've said it before, but you never listened. It didn't matter enough. This time it'll have to matter, or I won't say it again. I'm in love with you." He caught her shoulders. "That's the way it is, whatever you do about it." "What am I supposed to do about it?" There was a loose and fluttery sensation in her stomach she recognized as pure panic. "Oh, this is just a mess." "Your usual response to me telling you I love you is to run off and marry somebody else." He lifted his brow as her mouth fell open. "That's not... I don't..." Oh, God, he was right. She did. We could try something new this time out. We could try dealing with this like normal people and see where it goes. We could spend time with each other, do more together than jump into bed. There's more between us than sex." She sniffled. "How do you know?" He laughed a little and brushed at her hair. "All right, let's say I want to find out if there's more between us than sex. What if there isn't? What if there is? What if there isn't?" He sighed. "Then I guess we'll end up spending a lot of time in bed. If there's anything left of it," he added, and stepped over to tug away the pillow the puppy was trying to chew to bits. He was so solid, so smart and kind and handsome, and he loved her. But no one ever loved her for long. "Lighten it up," Faith ordered herself, at least until her heart stopped jumping. "I don't know about a relationship with a man who sleeps with little mongrel dogs. Miss Dottie dropped her off this morning on her way to church. I was too hungover to do anything but plop us both in bed." "What's wrong with her?" "Who? Oh, the puppy? Nothing." He leaned over, ruffled fur, scratched ears. "Bright-eyed and healthy, had all her shots and took 'em like a champ." "Then what are you doing with her?" "Keeping her for you." "For me?" Faith took a full step back. "I don't want a dog." "Sure you do." He plucked the puppy from the bed and pushed her into Faith's arms. "Look, she likes you." "Puppies like everybody," Faith protested as she twisted her head to try to avoid the pup's cheerful tongue. "Exactly." With the dimples flickering in his cheeks, Wade slipped his arms around Faith's waist, sandwiching the puppy between them. "And everybody likes puppies. She'll depend on you, entertain you, keep you company, and love you no matter what. She'll pee on the rug. She'll chew my shoes. Some. She'll need discipline and training and patience. She'll need you." They'd known each other most of their lives. Just because they'd spent most of their time together between the sheets didn't mean she didn't have clues as to how his mind worked. "Is this a dog or a life lesson you're giving me?" "Both." He leaned over to kiss Faith's cheek. "Give it a try. If it doesn't work out, I'll take her back." The puppy was warm and trying desperately to snuggle in the curve of Faith's neck and shoulder. What was going on? It seemed everyone was hammering at her all at once. First Boots, then Cade, and now Wade. "You've got my head spinning. I can't keep up with you today, and that's the only reason I'm agreeing to this." "To us or to the puppy?" "A little bit of both." "That's a good enough start for me. There's puppy food in the kitchen. Why don't you go feed her while I get a shower? I'm going to be late for dinner at my folks'. Why don't you come with me?" "Thanks, but I'm not ready for family dinners quite yet." She remembered all too well the cool, clear gleam in his mother's eyes. "Go on and shower. You stink worse than a litter of puppies." She frowned as she carried the puppy into the kitchen. She wasn't sure if she was ready for any of this, any of it at all. 18. Tori had barely unlocked the door on Monday morning when it chimed open. "Morning. I'm Sherry Bellows. I tied my dog to your bench outside. Hope that's all right." Tori glanced out, saw a hairy mountain sitting docilely on the sidewalk. "It's fine. He's big, isn't he? And beautiful." "He's a doll baby. We just got back from a morning run in the park, and I thought I'd stop in. I was here Saturday for a little while. You had quite a crowd." "Yes, it kept me busy. Is there something I can show you, or would you like to just browse?" "Actually, I wondered if you were thinking of taking on any help." Sherry flipped back her ponytail, lifted her arms. "I'm not exactly dressed for job hunting," she said with a smile and tugged the damp T-shirt down over her running shorts, "but I just followed impulse. I teach at the high school, will teach. Summer classes starting middle of June, then full-time in the fall. Doesn't sound like you need a job." "I've got the next couple of weeks, then Saturdays and half-days through September. I'd enjoy working in a place like yours and the extra money a part-time job would bring in. I put myself through college working retail, so I know the ropes. I can give you references, and I don't have a problem working for minimum wage." "To tell you the truth, Sherry, I haven't really thought about hiring, at least not until I see how the business goes for the first few weeks." Can't be easy to run the place solo. If there was one thing Sherry had learned while pursuing her teaching degree, it was persistence. No breaks, no time to do paperwork or check inventory or make your orders. Since you're open 6 days a week, that doesn't give you much opportunity to run errands, do your banking, your shopping. I imagine you ship, don't you? Well, yes, you'd have to close the shop every time you needed to scoot down to the post office or wait to ship orders until the next morning before you opened. That adds extra hours to your day. Anybody who can put together a business like this on her own knows her time is worth money. Tori took another good look. Sherry was young, pretty, damp from jogging, and very direct. And she had a point. Tori had been in the shop since 8, boxing orders for shipping, doing paperwork, rushing to the bank and the post office. Not that she didn't enjoy it. It gave her a lovely flush of satisfaction, but it would become more and more demanding as time went on. At the same time, she wasn't sure she wanted to share her shop with anyone, even part-time. There was a deep pleasure in having it all to herself, and that, she admitted, was indulgent and impractical. "You've caught me off guard. Why don't you write down your address and phone number and those references?" Tori walked behind the counter for her clipboard. "Give me some time to think about it." "Terrific." Sherry took the pen Tori offered, tapped it on the clipboard. "And I come with a partner, a 2-for-1 deal." She nodded toward the window where 2 women had stopped to admire Mongo. "He's so precious people can't help but want to give him a good pet. Since they're standing there, they'll just have to look at your display. I bet they come in." "Clever." Tori lifted a brow. "Maybe I should just buy a dog." Sherry laughed and began to write. "Oh, you'd never find another like my Mongo, and as good as he is, he can't ring up sales." "Good point. And good call," she added quietly when the 2 women stepped into the shop. "Is that your dog?" "He's mine," Sherry turned, beaming. "I hope he didn't bother you." "Why, he's the sweetest thing, just a great big ball of fur." "Gentle as a lamb," Sherry assured them. "We just had to stop in and see all the pretty things in here. Isn't this a wonderful place?" "Very nice. I don't recall seeing it before." "We just opened Saturday," Tori told her. "I haven't been down this part of town for quite a while." The woman glanced around. Her friend was already wandering. "I do like those candle stands in the window. We've just moved into a new house, and I'm doing some redecorating." "I'll get them out for you." Tori glanced at Sherry. "Excuse me." "Oh, you go right on. Take your time." Sherry watched as Tori assisted the customers. Low-key, she noted. Well, she could do low-key, let the merchandise sell itself, but she didn't think it would hurt if she chatted. It was so hard for her not to, and she thought it might be a nice balance against Tori's quiet class. She'd get the job, Sherry determined, as she continued to write and keep one eye on the procedure. She was good at talking people into things, and she really could use the extra money. To gild the lily a bit, she enthused over the customers' choices, drew them into friendly conversation while Tori boxed and wrapped. They left happy and well loaded down. "That was nice, but I think you could have talked Sally into those garden plaques." "If she wants them, she'll be back." Amused, Tori filed the credit card receipts. "And I'm banking on her friend talking her into it over lunch." "You're good with people. Do you know anything about crafts?" "I'm a very fast learner. And since I admire your taste in merchandise, it'll be an easy lesson. I can start right away." Tori was on the point of agreeing. Something about Sherry hit all the right notes. Then the door opened, and her mind emptied of everything but terrorized shock. "Hello there, Tori." Hannibal spread his lips in a wide, wide smile. "Been a while." He shifted his eyes, spread that bright look over Sherry. "That your dog out there, Missy?" "Yes, that's Mongo. I hope you didn't mind him." "Oh, no, indeed. Looks to be as friendly as a Sunday social. Mighty big dog for a little thing like you. Saw you running with him in the park a while ago. Couldn't tell who was leading who." Sherry felt a quick ripple of unease, but managed to laugh. "Oh, he lets me think I'm in charge." "A good dog's a faithful friend. More faithful than people, mostly. Tori, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend here? Hannibal Bodine," he said before Tori could speak, and held out the big hand he'd so often used to silence her. "I'm Victoria's daddy." "It's nice to meet you." Relaxed again, Sherry gave his hand a warm shake. "You must be so proud of your daughter and what she's done here." "Hardly a day goes by I don't think of it." His eyes pinned Tori again. "And her." Tori shoved at the edges of shock. If he was here, she had to deal with him, and deal with him alone. "Sherry, I appreciate your coming in. I'll look this over and call you soon." "I appreciate that. I'm trying to talk your daughter into hiring me. Maybe you could put in a good word. Nice to have met you, Mr. Bodine. I'll wait to hear from you, Tori." She walked out and crouched by the dog. Tori could hear her delighted laughter and the dog's welcoming bark through the closed door. "Well, now." He put his hands on his hips and turned to study the shop. "This is quite a place you've got here. Looks like you're doing pretty well for yourself." He hadn't changed. Why hadn't he changed? Did he look older? He didn't seem to. He hadn't lost his girth or his hair or that dark gleam in his eyes. Time didn't seem to touch him. And when he turned back, she felt herself shrinking. She felt the years and all the effort she'd put into remaking herself slipping away. "What do you want?" "Real well for yourself." He stepped up to the counter, closing the distance, and she saw she'd been wrong, at least partially wrong. There was some age on his face, carved into deep lines around his mouth, sagging in his jowls, scored across his brow like whiplashes. You come back here to flaunt that in your old hometown? Pride goeth before a fall, Victoria. How did you know I was here? Did Mama tell you? A father's a father all of his life. I've kept my eye on you. Did you come back here to boast and shame me? I came back here for myself. It has nothing to do with you, she said, and thought, lies, lies, lies. It was here you set the town talking, had 'em pointing fingers. It was here you defied me and the Lord for the first time. The shame of what you did and what you were drove me from here. Margaret Lavelle's money in your pocket drove you from here. A muscle jumped in his cheek, a warning. So, people are talking already. I don't care for that. A liar giveth ear to a naughty tongue. They'll talk more if you spend any time around here, and those who are looking for you are bound to find you. I've been to see Mama. She's worried about you. Got no cause to. I'm head of my own house. A man comes and goes as he sees fit. Runs. You ran after you were caught and arrested and charged for assaulting that woman. You lit out and left Mama alone, and when they catch you this time, there won't be probation. They'll put you behind bars. You mind your mouth. His hand shot out. She was prepared for a blow, was braced for it, but he grabbed her shirt front and hauled her half over the counter. You show me respect. You owe me your life. It was my seed started you into this world, to my everlasting regret. She thought of the scissors under the counter, imagined them in her hand as he dragged her over another inch, and wondered as she looked into the terrible and familiar rage in his face if she was capable of using them. If you lay a hand on me, I swear I'll go straight to the police. You hit me and I'll tell them of all the times you left me bruised and battered. When I'm done, she gasped, fought not to cry out when he yanked her hair back with his free hand and the rough edge of his fingers scraped like a burn over the side of her throat. Tears of pain leaked out of her eyes and made her voice rasp. When I'm done, they'll put more bars around you. I swear it. Now you let me go and you walk out of here. I'll forget I ever saw you. You would dare to threaten me? It's not a threat. It's a fact. The fury and hate rolling out of him almost smothered her. She could feel her throat closing against it, her chest clogging. She wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Let me go. She kept her eyes on his as she slid her hand under the counter, feeling for the scissors. Let me go before someone comes through and sees you. Emotions lit over his face. Fear added to the mix of violence pumping from him. Her fingers brushed the cool metal handles, and he jerked her to the side, all but rammed her into the cash register. I need money. You give me what you got in there. You owe me for every breath you've ever taken. There isn't much. It won't take you far. She opened the cash drawer, pulled out money with both hands. Anything to get him out, anything to get him away. That lying whore back in Hartsville will burn in hell. He kept his hand on her hair as he stuffed the money in his pocket. And so will you. You'll already be there. She didn't know why she did it. She couldn't foresee future events. She couldn't predict. That was one small blessing. But she focused her eyes on his and spoke as if ripe with visions. You won't live out the year, and you'll die in pain and fear and fire. You'll die screaming for mercy, the mercy you never gave me. He went white and shoved her away from him so that her back hit the wall and supplies tumbled. He lifted an arm, pointing. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. You remember that. You tell anyone you saw me here today, I'll come back for you and do what should have been done the minute you were born with a cowl over your face. Devil's mark. You're already damned. He shoved out the door, ducked his head, and hurried away. Tori simply slid down to the floor. Already damned. She stared blankly at the scissors teetering on the edge of the under counter. She'd nearly had them in her hand, very nearly. One of them would have been in hell if she'd firmed her grip on them. She wasn't sure she would have cared which one of them. At least it would have been over. She brought her knees up, pressed her face into them, and curled into a ball as she'd done so often as a child. That's how Faith found her when she came in with a wriggling puppy under her arm. Jesus, Tori! With one glance, she took in the open and empty register, the scatter of supplies, and the woman trembling on the floor. God, are you hurt? She set the puppy down, and as it scampered joyfully away, rushed behind the counter. Let's have a look. Let me have a look at you. I'm all right. It's nothing. Getting robbed in broad daylight in this town is something. You're shaking all over. Did they have a gun, a knife? No, it's okay. I don't see any blood. Well, ouch, you're a little raw back here on the neck. I'll call the police. You want a doctor? No, no police, no doctor. No police? I just saw some big brute of a man skulking out of here. Walk in and see your cash register open, empty, and you sprawl behind the counter and you don't want the police? What do they do in the big city when they get robbed? Make cupcakes? I wasn't robbed. Exhausted, she let her head fall back and rest against the wall. I gave him the money. Under $100. The money doesn't matter. Then you want to give me some while you're at it? Because if that's how you plan to run your business, you won't be here very long. I'm going to be here. I'm going to stay here. Nothing's going to make me run away again. Nothing. No one. Not ever again. Faith didn't have much experience with hysteria unless it was her own, but she thought she recognized it in the rise of Tori's voice, the sudden wildness in her eyes. That's the spirit. Why don't we just get up off the floor here, go on in the back a minute? I said I'm all right. Then you're stupid or a liar. Either way, let's go. Tori tried to push her away, tried to stand on her own, but her legs wouldn't manage it. They buckled as Faith pulled her up and left her no choice but to lean. We'll just go on back. I'm going to leave the puppy out here. The what? Don't you worry about him. He's about half housebroken. You got anything back here to drink that's got a bite to it? No. That figures. Tidy Tori wouldn't have herself a bottle of Jim Beam in the drawer. Now sit down, catch your breath, then tell me why I'm not calling the police. It would just make it worse. Because it was my father you saw leaving the store. I gave the money to him so he'd go away. He put that mark on you. When Tori simply stared, Faith drew a deep breath in and out. Guess it's not the first time. Oh, Hope didn't tell me. I imagine you swore her to secrecy, but I had eyes. I saw you with bruises and welts plenty of times. Always had a story about falling down or running into something, but the funny thing was I never noticed you being clumsy. As I recall, you had a number of those welts and bruises the morning you came to tell us about Hope. Faith walked over to the mini-fridge, found a bottle of water, opened it. Is that why you didn't meet her that night, because he'd walloped you? She held out the water, gauging Tori's silence. I guess I've been focusing my blame on what happened back then on the wrong person. Tori took the water, soothed her throat. The person to blame is the one who killed her. We don't know who that is. It's more of a comfort to put blame on a face and a name. You can pick up that phone, call the police, and bring charges. Chief Russ will go after him. I just want him gone. I don't expect you to understand. People never do, but surprise, considering Tori, Faith eased a hip onto the desk. My papa rarely raised a hand to me. I think I got a swat on the butt from time to time and shamed the devil less often than I deserved it. But he sure knew how to shout and how to strike terror in a young girl's heart. Oh, God, she missed him. It catapulted into her, the longing for her father. Not because I thought he'd take a strap to me, she said quietly now, but because he let me know every time I let him down. I was afraid to let him down. That's not the same thing as this, I know it, but I'm asking myself if he'd been a different kind of father, a different kind of man, and I spent my life being afraid, what would I do? You'd call the police and have him thrown in jail. Damn right, but that doesn't mean I don't understand why you aren't. When Papa was cheating with that woman, I never told my mother. For a while I actually believed she didn't know, but I didn't tell her. I thought maybe it would all go away. I was wrong, but thinking it gave me some peace of mind. Steadier, Tori set the bottle of water on the desk. Why are you being nice to me? I have no idea. Never did like you much, but that was mostly because Hope did and I was contrary. Right now you're sleeping with my brother, and it occurs to me that he means more to me than I realized. Makes sense to get to know you so I can see how I feel about all that. So you're being nice to me because I'm having sex with Cade. The dry way it was phrased tickled Faith's humor, in a roundabout way, and I'll tell you this because it'll piss you off. I feel sorry for you. You're right. Tori got to her feet, grateful the trembling had stopped. It pisses me off. Figured. You don't like sympathy, but the fact is no one should be afraid of her own father, and no man has the right blood kin or not to leave bruises and scars on a child. Now I better go see what kind of trouble that puppy's gotten herself into out there. Puppy? Tori's eyes went wide. What puppy? My puppy. Haven't named her yet. Faith strolled out and let out a hoot of laughter. Isn't that the cutest thing? She's such a little darling. The little darling had found the tissue paper and was currently waging a war on it. Casualties were many and scattered like snow over the floor. She'd managed to find a roll of ribbon as well, and most of that was wound around her chubby torso. Oh, for God's sake, don't take on so. Can't be more than $5 worth of supplies. I'll pay for 'em. There's my baby. The pup barked joyfully, tripped over a tail of ribbon, and sprawled adoringly at Faith's feet. I swear I never thought a little bit of a thing like this could make me laugh so much. Look at you, Mama's baby doll, all wrapped up like Christmas. She lifted the puppy high and made cooing noises. You're acting like an idiot. I know, but isn't she sweet? She just loves me to death, too. Mama's got to clean up this mess now before the mean lady scolds my baby. Already on her hands and knees, Tori looked up. You set that shopwrecker down in here again, I'll bite your ankle. I've been teaching her to sit. She's smart as a new hat. Just watch. Despite the threat, Faith set the puppy down, kept one hand on its rump. Sit. Be a good girl now. Sit for Mama. The puppy leaped forward, slapped its tongue against Tori's face, then chased its own tail. Some new hat. Isn't she precious? Downright adorable, but she doesn't belong in here. Gathering up the bulk of the ruined supplies, Tori rose. Go take her for a walk or whatever. We were going to buy a nice pretty set of bowls for her food and water. Not my bowls. You are not buying handcrafted pottery bowls designed by artisans for puppy chow. What do you care what I use it for as long as I pay the price? Only more determined, Faith marched over, scooped up the pup, and picked out 2 matching bowls of royal blue with bold emerald swirls. We like these, don't we, darling? Don't we, sweetums? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. A sale's a sale, isn't it? Faith crossed to the counter, set the bowls down. Ring me up, and don't forget to add the cost of the supplies. Forget the supplies. Behind the counter, Tori dumped the tissue in the wastebasket, then dealt with the transaction. That's $53.26 for puppy bowls. Fine, I'll pay cash. Here, hold her a minute. Faith pushed the pup at Tori so she could dig into her purse. Charmed despite herself, Tori gave the puppy a nuzzle. You're going to be eating like a queen, aren't you? A regular queen bee. Queen bee? Why, that's just perfect. Faith laid the money on the counter and snatched the puppy back. That's who you are, Queen Bee. I'm going to get you a fancy collar that sparkles. Tori shook her head as she made change. I'm seeing a whole new side of you, Faith. So am I. I kind of like it. Come on, Bee. We got places to go and people to see. She gathered up the shopping bag. I don't think I can get the door. I'll get it. Tori opened it and after a minute's hesitation touched Faith's arm. Faith, thank you. You're welcome. Your makeup could use a little freshening, she added, and left. She didn't intend to get involved. The way Faith looked at it, other people's personal lives were fascinating to speculate about, to gossip about, but all from a safe and smug distance. But she kept seeing the way Tori had looked, curled up behind the counter, with ribbon and tape and silver cords scattered around her. She kept seeing that ugly red mark on Tori's neck. There'd been marks on Hope. She hadn't seen them. No one had let her see them, but she'd known. She didn't hold with a man pushing a woman around. That's all there was to it. When it was kin, you didn't run to the police, but there were other ways to make things right. She bent to kiss Bee's head, then walked straight to the bank to tell J.R. what had happened to his niece. He didn't waste time. J.R. canceled his next appointment, told his assistant manager he had to leave on personal business, and set out for Tori's shop at such a brisk pace his shirt was damp with sweat by the time he got there. She had customers, a young couple who were debating over a blue and white serving platter. Tori was giving them room, staying on the other side of the shop, replacing the candle stand she'd sold that morning. Uncle Jimmy, is it heating up out there? You're flushed. Can I get you something cold? No. Yes, he decided. It would give him time to compose himself. Whatever you've got handy, honey. I'll just be a minute. She went into the back, then leaned on the door and cursed. She'd seen it in his eyes. Faith must have made a beeline to the bank. So much for trust, Tori thought, wrenching open the refrigerator. So much for understanding. Then, drawing a cleansing breath, she carried the can of ginger ale out to her uncle. Thanks, honey. He took a good long swig. Why don't I buy you lunch? It's not even noon, and I brought something from home. I don't want to close the shop in the middle of the day, but thanks. Gran and Cecil get off all right this morning? First thing. Boots tried to talk 'em into staying a few days, but you know your Gran. She likes to be in her own. Always itchy when she's away from home. The young couple started out with the woman glancing back wistfully. We'll come back. I hope you do. Enjoy your day. All right now, let me see. The door had hardly closed when J.R. set down the ginger ale and took Tori's shoulders. He studied the raw skin on the side of her neck. Oh, sweetie, that bastard, why didn't you call me? Because there was nothing you could do, because it was over, and because there wasn't a point in worrying you, which is all Faith's done by running down and telling you. Now you stop that. She did exactly what was right, and I'm beholden to her for it. You didn't want to call the police, and maybe it's easier on your mother if we don't, but I'm family. I know. She let him draw her into a hug. He's gone now. All he wanted was money. He's scared, running scared. They'll catch him before long. I just want it to be away from here and away from me. I can't help it. Of course you can't. I want a promise from you. Gently, J.R. held her out at arm's length. If you see him around again, even if he doesn't try to get near you, I want you to promise you'll tell me right off. All right, but don't worry. He got what he came for. He's miles away by now. She needed to believe it. 19. She believed it for the rest of the day. She covered herself with the thin, battle-scarred armor of that belief through the long afternoon. And though she knew it was foolish, she opened one of the candles wrapped and ribboned on display and set it on the counter. She hoped the light and scent of it would help dispel some of the ugly film her father's visit had smeared on the air. At 6, she locked up, then caught herself scanning the street as she had done for weeks when she'd escaped to New York. It angered her that he could put that cautious anxiety back in her step, that jolt back in her heart. Had she really stood in the ruin of her mother's house and claimed she could and would face down her father and all that fear if he dared slither into her life again? Where was her courage now? All she could do was promise herself she would find it again. But she locked the car doors the minute she was inside, and her pulse jittered as she constantly shifted her glance from the road ahead to the rearview mirror on the drive home. She passed cars, even stirred herself to wave at Piney as his pickup rumbled by with a quick toot of the horn. Field work would be done for the day, she thought. Hands would be heading home, and so would the boss. So it was with an irritating bump of disappointment that she turned into her lane and found it empty. She hadn't realized she'd been expecting Cade to be there, anticipating it. True, she hadn't greeted his statement that he was basically moving in with any real enthusiasm, but the more she thought of it, the easier it had been to accept, and once accepted, enjoyed. It had been a very long time since she'd wanted companionship, someone to share the day with, to talk over inconsequential things with, to find little things to laugh over, complain about. To have someone there when the night seemed too full of sound and movement and memories. And what was she giving back? Resistance, arguments, irritable and unstated agreement. Just general bitchiness, she murmured as she climbed out of the car. That, at least, she could stop. She could do what women traditionally did to make up for petty crimes. She could fix him a nice dinner and seduce him. The idea lifted her mood. Wouldn't he be surprised when she made the moves for a change? She hoped she remembered how, because it was about time she took back a little control. By doing so, she'd take some of the responsibility for whatever was going on between them off his shoulders. She'd tried to please Jack that way, and then, no. She pushed that train of thought firmly away as she unlocked her front door. Cade wasn't Jack, and she wasn't the same woman she'd been in New York. Past and present didn't have to connect. When she entered, she knew that was just one more delusion. She knew he'd been there, inside what she'd tried to make her own home. Her father. There'd been little for him to destroy, and she didn't think he'd put much effort into it. He hadn't come in to break her few pieces of furniture or punch holes in the walls, though he'd done some of both. Her chair was overturned, and he'd taken something sharp to the underside. The lamp she'd bought only days before was shattered. The table she'd hoped to refinish tossed into the corner with one of its legs snapped like a twig. She recognized the size and shape of the dents in the wallboard. It was his signature mark, left when for whatever reason he chose to use fists on inanimate objects instead of his daughter. She left the door open, an escape route in case her instincts were off and he was still in the house. But the bedroom was empty. He'd yanked off the bedclothes, ripped at the mattress. She supposed the iron bed frame had been more trouble to him than it was worth, as he'd left it be. The drawers of her dresser were pulled out, her clothes heaped in piles. No, he hadn't really wanted to destroy her things, she mused, or he'd have taken that sharp tool to her clothing as well. He'd done that before to teach her a lesson about dressing appropriately. He'd been looking for more money, or for things he could easily sell for cash. If he'd been drinking, it would have been worse. If he'd been drinking, he'd have waited for her. As it was, she bent down to pick up a rumpled blouse, then let out a cry of despair when she saw the small carved wooden box she used to hold her jewelry. She pounced on it, sinking down when she found it empty. Most of what she'd owned had been trinkets, really, good trinkets, carefully selected but easily replaced. But among them had been the garnet and gold earrings her grandmother had given her when she'd turned 21. Earrings that had been her own great-grandmother's, her only heirloom, priceless, irreplaceable, lost. "Tori!" The alarm in Cade's voice, the rush of footsteps, brought her quickly to her feet. "I'm all right, I'm in here." He burst into the room, had her pinned against him before she could say another word. Tangled waves of fear and release pumped from him, over and into her. "I'm all right," she repeated. "I just got here, minutes ago. He was already gone. I saw your car, the living room. I thought—" He tightened his grip, pressed his face into her hair. "Just hold on a second." He knew what it was to have terror dig slick claws into his throat. He'd never thought he'd feel it again. "Thank God you're all right. I meant to be here before you, but I got hung up. We'll call the police, then you're coming to Beau Rev. I should have taken you there this morning." "Cade, there's no point in all that. It was my father." She drew away, set the box down on the dresser. "He came to the shop this morning. We had words. This is just his way of letting me know he can still punish me." "Did he hurt you?" "No." The denial was quick and automatic, but his gaze had already landed on the side of her neck. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His eyes went dark, narrowed into slits. As violence, she knew how to recognize violence, swam into them. Then he turned away and found the phone. "Cade, wait, please. I don't want to call the police." His head snapped up, and that same narrowed rage snapped out at her. "You don't always get what you want." Sherry Bellows celebrated her potential job by opening a bottle of wine, turning up her Sheryl Crow CD as loud as her neighbors would tolerate, and dancing around her apartment. Everything was working out perfectly. She loved Progress. It was exactly the sort of small, close-knit town she wanted to be a part of. The stars, she thought, had been well aligned when she'd followed instinct and applied for the position at Progress High. She liked the other teachers. Though Sherry didn't know all her associates very well as yet, that would all change in the fall when she started full-time. She was going to be a wonderful teacher, someone her students could come to with their problems and their questions. Her classes were going to be fun, and she'd inspire her students to read, to enjoy, to seek out books for pleasure, planting the seeds for a lifelong love affair with literature. Oh, she'd make them work, and work hard, but she had so many ideas, so many fresh and wonderful notions on how to make the work interesting, even entertaining. Years from now, when her students looked back, they'd remember her fondly. "Miss Bellows," they'd say, "she made a difference in my life." It was all she'd ever wanted. Wanted it enough, she thought now, to study like a demon, to work long and hard to subsidize her scholarship. It had been worth every penny. She had the bills to prove it. But that was only money, and she'd found a way to deal with that. Working at Southern Comfort was going to be a delight. It would help ease the burden of those student loans, give her a little financial breathing room. But more, it would provide her with one more access to the community. She'd meet people, make friends, and before long she'd be a familiar face in Progress. She was already widening her circle, her neighbors in the building, Maxine at the vet's, and she planned to cement that connection by giving a party, a kind of potluck get-together sometime in June. A summer kickoff, she mused, that wouldn't conflict with anyone's plans. She'd invite Tori, too, of course, and Dr. Hunk, the dreamily dimpled vet. She'd definitely like to get to know him better, she decided as she poured a second glass of wine. She'd asked the Mooneys. Mr. Mooney at the bank had been so helpful when she'd set up her new accounts. Then there was Lissy at the Realtors. A tongue-wagger, Sherry admitted, but it was always good to have the town gossip in your camp. You found out such interesting things, and she was married to the mayor. Another looker, Sherry remembered, with a great smile and a superior butt. A bit of a flirt, too. It was a good thing she'd found out he was married. She wondered if it would be presumptuous to invite the Lavells. They were, after all, the VIPs of Progress. Still, Kincaid Lavelle had been very nice, very friendly whenever they'd bumped into each other around town. And talk about gorgeous. She could make the invitation very casual. It couldn't do any harm. She wanted lots and lots of people. She'd keep the patio doors open as she always did, let guests spill outside. She loved her pretty little garden apartment, and she could buy another lounge chair to sit outside. The one she had looked lonely out there, and she didn't intend to be lonely. One day she'd meet the right man, and they'd fall in love over warm nights and marry in the spring, start a life together. She just wasn't meant to stay single. She wanted a family. Not that she'd give up teaching, of course. A teacher was what she was, but there was no reason she couldn't be a wife and mother, too. She wanted it all, and the sooner the better. Humming to the music, she stepped out onto the patio where Mungo was dozing. He stirred enough to thump his tail and rolled over in case she wanted to scratch his belly. Obliging, she crouched down, giving him a good rub as she sipped and glanced idly around. Her patio opened up to a nice grassy area that was bordered by the trees of the park on one side and a quiet residential avenue on the other. She'd chosen the apartment first because they allowed pets, and where she went, Mungo went. As a bonus, it was convenient for their morning runs in the park. The apartment was small, but she didn't need much room as long as Mungo had a place to exercise, and in a town like Progress, housing didn't cost an arm and two legs as it did in Charleston or Columbia. "This is the right place for us, Mungo. This is home for us." Straightening, she wandered back inside into the small galley kitchen as she sang along with Cheryl about her favorite mistake. She'd continue her celebration by fixing herself a huge salad for dinner. Life, she thought as she chopped and diced, was good. Twilight was edging closer by the time she finished. Made too much again, she thought. That was one of the problems with living alone. Still, Mungo liked his carrots and celery, too, so she'd add them to his evening meal. They'd have it on the patio, and she'd treat herself to one more glass of wine, get a little tipsy. Then they'd take a nice long walk, she decided, as she squatted down to scoop Mungo's kibble out of the plastic bin, maybe get some ice cream. She lifted the bowl. A movement at the corner of her eye had her heart wheeling into her throat. The bowl flew out of her hands, and she managed one short scream. Then a hand clamped over her mouth. The knife she'd used to make her dinner pricked at her throat. "Be quiet. Be very, very quiet, and I won't cut you. Understand?" Her eyes were already circling wildly. Wings of fear beat in her belly, had her skin going hot and damp. But confusion rode over it. She couldn't see his face, but thought she recognized the voice. It made no sense at all. His hand slid slowly away from her mouth to grip her chin. "Don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me." Now, why would I do that? Her hair smelled sweet, a whore's blonde hair. "Let's just go in the bedroom where we can be comfortable." "Don't!" She gasped as the edge of the knife teased along her throat, tipped up her chin. The scream was inside her, desperate to burst out, but the knife turned it into silent tears as he pushed her out of the kitchen. Her patio doors were closed now, the blinds shut. "Mungo, what did you do with Mungo?" "You don't think I'd hurt a nice friendly dog like that, do you?" The power of the moment cruised through him, spread, made him hard and hot and invincible. "He's just taking a quiet nap. Don't you worry about your dog, honey. Don't you worry about a thing. This is going to be good. This is going to be just what you want." He shoved her belly down on the bed, put his knee in the small of her back, and added weight. He'd brought precautions. A man had to be prepared even for a whore, especially for a whore. After a while they screamed no matter what, and he didn't want to use the knife, not when he was so good with his hands. He took the bandana from his pocket, gagged her. When she began to stir, when she began to struggle, he was in heaven. She wasn't weak. She kept the body she liked to flaunt and tease men with in good shape. It only excited him to have her struggle. The first time he hit her, the thrill of it slammed into him like sex. He hit her again so they both understood who was in charge. He tied her hands behind her back. He couldn't afford those nails with their sluttish pink polish scraping any of his skin. Quietly he walked over to shut the curtain and close them into the dark. She was moaning against the gag, dazed from the blows. The sound of it made him tremble so that he nicked her skin a little as he used the knife to cut her clothes away. She tried to roll, tried to buck, but when he put the point of the blade just under her eye, pressed, she went very still. "This is what you want." He unzipped, then flipped her onto her back and straddled her. "It's what you asked for, what you all ask for." When it was done, he wept. Tears of self-pity ran down his face. She wasn't the one, but what else could he do? She'd put herself in his path. She'd given him no choice. It wasn't perfect. He'd done everything he wanted, and still, it wasn't perfect. Her eyes were glazed and empty as he took off the gag, kissed her cheeks. He cut the cord from her wrists, stuffed it back in his pockets. He turned her music off and left the way he'd come in. "I can't come to Beau Rev." Tori sat on the front porch in the soft night air. She couldn't face going back inside quite yet, wasn't yet prepared to deal with the mess left by her father and compounded by the police. Cade contemplated the cigar he'd lighted to ease his own nerves, wished fleetingly he had a whiskey to go with it. You're going to have to tell me why. Staying here the way things are doesn't make any sense, and you're a sensible woman. Most of the time, she agreed. Being sensible cuts down on complications and saves energy. You were right about calling the police. I realize that now. I wasn't being sensible. It was pure, raw emotion. He frightens me and embarrasses me. By trying to keep it contained, as always, I thought I'd limit the fear and humiliation. It's hateful to be a victim, Cade. Makes you feel exposed and angry and somehow guilty at the same time. I won't argue with that, even though you're smart enough to know that guilt has no part in what you should be feeling. Smart enough to know it, but not clever enough to figure out how not to feel it. It'll be easier once I put the house back to rights and get rid of what he left behind in it. But I'll still remember the way Chief Russ sat writing in his little book and watching my face, how my father intimidated me today, how he's done so all my life. There's no cause for your pride to be wounded over this, Tori. Pride goeth before a fall. My father reminded me of that this morning. He does love to use the Bible to hammer his point home. They'll find him. There are police in 2 counties looking for him now. The world's a lot bigger than 2 counties. Hell, South Carolina's a lot bigger than 2 counties. Swamps and mountains and glades, lots and lots of places to hide. She rocked restlessly, needing movement. If he finds a way to contact my mother, she'll help him, out of love and out of duty. That being the case, it just makes my point about you coming with me to Beau Rev. I can't do that. Why? A number of reasons. First, your mother would object. My mother has nothing to say about it. Oh, don't say that, Cade. She pushed out of her chair, walked to the end of the porch. Was he out there, she wondered, watching, waiting? You don't mean it, or you shouldn't. That's her home, and she has a right in saying who comes into it. Why should she object, especially after I explain it to her? Explain what? She turned back. That you're installing your lover in her house because your lover's daddy is a crazy man? He drew on his cigar, took his time about it. I wouldn't choose those particular words, but more or less. And I'm sure she'll greet me with fresh flowers and a box of fine chocolates. Oh, don't be such a man about this, she said with a wave of her hand before he could speak. Whatever it says on the damn deed, Cade, the house belongs to the woman in it, and I will not intrude on your mother's home. She's a difficult woman at times, most of the time, he admitted, but she isn't heartless. No, and her heart will not accept the woman she holds responsible for a beloved daughter's death. Don't argue with me about that. Tori's voice shook, nearly broke. It hurts me. All right. He tossed the cigar aside with one violent gesture, but his hands were gentle enough as he laid them on Tori's shoulders. If you won't or can't come with me, then I'll take you to your uncle's. And there we come to the second part of the problem. She lifted her hands to his. Irrational, bull-headed, illogical. I'll admit all that now so you don't have to feel obliged to point it out to me. I have to make a stand here, Cade. This isn't a strategic hill on a battlefield. For me, it's very much like that. I never thought about it quite that way, she said with a quiet laugh. But yes, this is very much my hill on my own personal battlefield. I've retreated so often. You once called me a coward to get my dander up, but the fact is I've been one most of my life. I've had small spurts of courage, and that makes it only worse when I see myself fall back yet again. I can't do it this time. How does staying here make you brave instead of stupid? Not brave, and yes, maybe stupid, but whole. I want so much to be whole again. I think I'd risk anything not to have this empty place in me. I can't let him run me out. She gazed toward the marsh that grew thicker, deeper, greener with encroaching summer. Mosquitoes whined in there, breeding in the dark water. Alligators slid through it, silent death. It was a place where snakes could slither and bogs could suck the shoe right off your foot. And it was a place, she thought, that went bright and beautiful with the twinkling of fireflies, where wildflowers thrived in the shade and the stingy light, where an eagle could soar like a king. There was no beauty without risk, no life without it. When I was a child, I lived scared in this house. It was a way of life, she said, and you got used to it the way you get used to certain smells, I suppose. When I came back, I made it mine, shaking out all those bad memories like dust from a rug, airing out that smell, Cade. Now he's tried to bring the fear back. I can't let him. I won't let him, she added, shifting until her eyes met his again. That's what I did this morning. Don't tell anyone. Keep it quiet. One more dirty little secret. If you hadn't pushed me, that's what I'd have done here, too. I'm staying. I'm cleaning him out of this place and staying. I hope he knows it. I wish I didn't admire you for it. He ran a hand down the sleek tail of her hair. Make it easier to bully you into doing things my way. You don't have much bully in you. Maybe it was relief, maybe it was something else that made her stroke her hand over his cheek. You maneuver, you don't push. Well, it speaks well for the future of our relationship that you've figured that out and can live with it. He drew her in, laid his lips on the top of her head. You matter to me. No, don't go stiff on me. I'll just have to maneuver you. You matter, Tori, more than I'd planned for you to matter. When she remained silent, he let frustration lead. Sometimes it was the most honest way. Give me something back, damn it. He jerked her back, then up, crushing his mouth to hers. She tasted the demand, the heat, the little licks of rage he'd concealed so well, and it was that shot of pure, unfiltered emotion from him that turned another bolt inside her. God, she didn't want to be loved or needed, didn't want to have those same feelings stirred to life again inside her, but he was here, and just by being made her feel again. I've already given you more than I thought I had. I don't know how much more there is. She held on to him, burrowed into him. There's so much happening inside me I can't keep up with it. It all circles back to you. Isn't that enough? Yeah. He eased her back to kiss her again, softly this time. Yeah, that's enough for now, as long as you make room for more. He skimmed his thumbs over her cheeks. Had a hell of a day, haven't you? I can't say it's been one of my best so far. Let's finish it right then. We'll get started. On what? He opened the screen door. You wanted to clean him out. Let's do it. They worked together for 2 hours. He turned on music. She wouldn't have thought of it, would have stayed focused on the details, kept her mind channeled down those strict lines, but the music drifted through the house into her head, just distracting enough to keep her from brooding. She wanted to burn the clothes he'd touched, could visualize carrying them outside, heaping them up, striking a match, but she couldn't afford the indulgence. Instead, she washed, folded, put away. They turned the damaged mattress over. It would have to be replaced, but it would do for now, and with fresh linens you hardly noticed. He talked about his work in a way that had his voice drifting pleasantly through her mind, like the music. They dealt with the wreckage of the kitchen, ate sandwiches, and she told him that she was considering hiring on help. It's a good idea. He helped himself to a beer, quietly pleased that she'd stocked some for him. You'll enjoy your business more if it doesn't strangle all your time. Sherry Bellows, that's the new high school teacher, isn't it? I met her and her dog a few weeks ago out at the mini-mart. Seems like a bundle of energy. That was my impression, in a very attractive package. He grinned and sipped his beer when Tori merely lifted her brows. Just thinking of you, darling. An attractive clerk's a business asset. You think she'll wear those little shorts? No, Tori said firmly, I don't. Bound to draw a lot of male customers if you let that be her uniform. That's a girl with very nice pins. Pins, Well, she and her pins depend on how her references check out, but I imagine they will. Tori swept up the last of the debris, dumped it in the trash. That seems to be the best that can be done. Feel better? Yes. She crossed the room to put away the broom and dustpan, considerably, and I'm very grateful for the help. I'm always open to gratitude. She took the pitcher from the refrigerator, poured herself a glass of iced tea. The bedroom closet's not very big, but I made some room, and there's an empty drawer in the dresser. He said nothing, only drank his beer, waited. You wanted to be able to have some of your things here, didn't you? That's right. So? So? We're not living together. She set down her glass. I've never lived with anyone, and that's not what this is. All right. But if you're going to be spending so much time here, you might as well have a place for some of your things. Very practical. Oh, go to hell. But there wasn't any heat in the response. You're not supposed to smile when you say that. He set his beer aside, then slid his arms around her. What do you think you're doing? Dancing. I never took you dancing. It's something people who aren't really living together ought to do now and then. It was an old, shuffling number with a boy asking a girl to stand by him when the land was dark. "Are you trying to be charming?" "I don't have to try. It's just part of my makeup." He dipped her, made her laugh. Very smooth. All those miserable hours of cotillion had to pay off. Poor little rich boy. She rested her head on his shoulder and let herself enjoy the dance, the feel of him against her, the scent of him. "Thanks." "You're welcome. When I was driving home tonight, I was thinking of you." "I like the sound of that." "And I was thinking, so far he's made all the moves. I let him because I wasn't sure if I really wanted to make any of my own or counter any of his. It was sort of easy to be maneuvered, I suppose. And I was thinking, I just wonder how Kincaid Lavelle would react if I got home and I fixed us a nice supper. He'd have appreciated that. Yes, well, some other time. That part of the thought process didn't pan out, but there was the second part, which was... She lifted her head from his shoulder, met his eyes. How would Kincaid Lavelle react if, after that, once we were all relaxed and quiet, just what would he do if I set out to seduce him? "Well," was all he could manage as she pressed closer, ran her hands intimately down his hips. The stirring in his blood was a not-so-quiet delight. "I think the least I can do as a gentleman is let you find out." This time it was she who unfastened buttons, his shirt, then her own. She laid her lips over his heart on the warm skin and vibrant beat. "I've had your taste with me since the first time you kissed me." While her lips played over him, she eased the shirt away. "I can bring tastes back, and I've done that with yours so many times already." She trailed her hands over his chest, his belly, a quiver, up to his shoulders, such broad, tough shoulders. "I like the feel of you, long, hard muscles. It excites me. And your hands, roughened from work, riding over me." She peeled her shirt open and let it fall to the floor to join his. Watching him, she unhooked her bra, let it slide away. "Touch me now." He cupped her breasts in his hands, the warm, soft weight of them, skimmed the nipples with the edges of his thumbs. "Yes, like that." Her head fell back as heat balled in her belly. "Exactly like that. My insides go liquid when you touch me. Can you see it?" Her eyes, long and dark, met his. Tell me." She moistened her lips, reached for the button of his jeans. His hands flexed on her one hard caress. "I want to feel what you feel. I want what's inside you, inside me. I've never tried that with anyone else, never wanted to. Will you let me?" He bent his head, rubbed his lips over hers. "Take what you want." It was a risk. She would be open, gaping, so much more defenseless than he. But she wanted it, all of it, and that exquisite bond of trust. Once more she lay her lips on him and opened mind, heart, body. It was a bolt, a lightning strike, the power of those coupled needs, images. His desire layered and tangled inside her with her own. It slashed through her, dark, bright, swollen with energy. Her head snapped back from the punch of it, and she came in one long, erotic gush. God! God! Wait! No, he'd never experienced anything like it. The twisted bonds of unity only knotted tighter in a bold and beautiful mass of arousal. More. He set his teeth on her shoulder, craving flesh. Again. Now. She couldn't stop it. It lashed through her like a storm, full of fury and brilliance. It was she who dragged him to the floor, she who panted out pleas, demands, threats as they tore at clothes. She clawed at him, nipped as they rolled over on the floor. His pulse was inside her, a savage beat that crashed against her own. The taste of him, the taste of herself, brewed together to saturate her. When he plunged into her, she felt the urgent pumping of his blood, the desperate maze of his thoughts. Lost. She cried out, once, twice. They were both lost. She heard her name, his voice calling it inside her mind seconds before it burst from his lips. When he came inside her, dragged her with him, the glory of it made her weep. 20. Wade had his hands full, what was left of them after the ornery Tabby, badly misnamed Fluffy, mangled them during her shots. Maxine was deep into finals, and he'd given her the day off, which meant he had only 2 hands to pit against 4 claws and a number of very sharp teeth. He'd concluded an hour before that he'd made a mistake of horrendous proportions by springing Maxine. He'd started the day with an emergency that required a house call and put him solidly behind. Add the minor war in the waiting area set off by a personality clash between a setter and a Bichon, the Olsons' baby goat who'd managed to eat the best part of Malibu Barbie until her arm became lodged in his throat, and Fluffy's vile temper, and he'd had a pisser of a morning. He was cursing, sweating, bleeding when Faith rushed in through the back. "Wade, honey, can you take a look at Bea for me? I think she's feeling poorly." "Take a number." "It'll only take a minute." "I haven't got a minute." "Oh, now, goodness, what happened to your hands?" Faith watched as Wade narrowly avoided another swipe and tucked the cat firmly under his arm. "Did that mean old pussycat scratch you, darling?" "Kiss my ass," was his best response. "Did she get you there, too?" Faith called out as he marched into the waiting area. "It's all right, baby," she nuzzled the puppy. "Daddy's going to take good care of you in just a minute." He came back in to scrub up and dug out antiseptic. "She's been whimpering and sort of moaning all morning, and her nose is a little warm. She doesn't want to play, just lies there, see?" Faith set Bea down, and the pup squatted by Wade's feet, looked up at him pitifully, then proceeded to throw up on his shoes. Oh, for goodness sake, must have been something she ate. Lila said I shouldn't give her all those cookies." Faith bit her lip but couldn't quite hold in the giggle. Wade simply stood staring at her, antiseptic in one hand, a thin trickle of blood on the other, and puppy vomit on his shoes. "We're awfully sorry. Bea, don't you eat that. That's just nasty." She scooped up the puppy. "I bet you feel so much better now, don't you, sweetheart? There, see that, Wade? She's wagging her tail again. I just knew if I brought her in to you, everything would be fine." "Is that how it looks to you, like everything's fine?" "Well, Bea's sicked up what was worrying her, and I don't imagine it's the first time you had a little doggy puke on you. I've got a waiting room full of patients. My hands are scratched to shit, and now my shoes are going to stink for the rest of the day." "Well, go on up and change them then." She stepped back when he made one of his hands into a claw. She loved the light that came into his eyes when his dander was up. "Now wait." He bunched the claw into a fist, then punched it lightly between his own eyes. "I'm going to go ditch these shoes, and when I come back, I want you to have cleaned this up." "Clean it up? Myself?" "That's right. Put your dog back in surgery, get a mop and bucket, and deal with it. I don't have time for this." He reached down, pulled off the ruined shoes at the heels. "And make it fast. I'm behind schedule." "Daddy's a little cross this morning," she murmured to Bea as Wade strode out to the garbage. She looked at the floor and grimaced. "Well, at least you got the best part of it on his shoes. It's not so bad." When he came back, she was dutifully, if inexpertly, mopping. There were suds gliding across the linoleum on little waves of water. It almost seemed to him they had a current, but he didn't have the heart to complain. "Almost done here. Bea's in the back playing with her squeaky bone. She's bright-eyed and frisky again." Faith dumped the mop in the bucket, sloshed more water. "I guess this needs to dry off some." As an alternative to screaming, he rubbed his hands over his face and laughed. "Faith, you are unique." "Of course I am." She stepped back as he picked up the bucket, emptied it, rinsed off the mop, then began to slop up suds and water. "Oh, well, I suppose that works, too. Do me a favor. Go on out there and tell Miss Jenkins to bring Mitch on back. That's the beagle who's been howling the last half hour. And if you can find a way to maintain some sort of order out there for the next 20 minutes, I'll buy you a fancy dinner at your choice of restaurants. Champagne? A Magnum. Let's just see what I can do." He got his 20 minutes barely when he heard the urgent cry, "Wade, Wade, come quick!" He bolted out, saw Piney Cobb staggering under the weight of Mongo. "Ran out into the road right in front of me. God almighty, he's bleeding pretty bad. Bring him in the back." He moved fast. The dog's breathing was labored, his pupils fixed and dilated. His thick fur was matted with blood, and more was dripping on the floor. "Here, on the table." "I hit the brakes," Piney muttered and stood back. "Swerved, but I clipped him anyway. I was heading into the hardware for some parts, and he come barreling out of the park right into the street." you know if you ran over him?" "Don't think I did." With trembling hands, he pulled out a faded red bandana and wiped his sweaty face. "Knocked him's what I think, but it happened fast." "Okay." Wade grabbed toweling, and since Faith was standing beside him, he simply took her hands, pushed them onto the cloth. "Press down, hard. I want that bleeding under control. He's in shock." He yanked open the drug cabinet, grabbed a bottle to prepare a hypo. "You just hang in there, boy, just hang on," he murmured as the dog began to stir and whimper. "Keep the pressure firm," he ordered Faith. "I'm giving him a sedative. I need to check for internal injuries." Her hands had shaken when he'd pressed them to the wound. She thought she'd seen straight down to the bone and the gash gaping down the dog's back leg, and her stomach had flipped over. She wanted to snatch her hands away from all that blood, to rush out of the room. Why couldn't Piney do it? Why couldn't someone else be here? She started to say so, the words jumping into her throat. She could smell the blood, the antiseptic, and the sour stench of Piney's panic sweat. But her gaze landed on Wade's face. Cool, composed, strong. His eyes were flat with concentration, his mouth firmed into one determined line. She stared at him, breathing through her teeth. Watching him work, the quick efficiency of it, the focus, calmed her even as the dog went still again beneath her hands. "No broken ribs. I don't think the wheel went over him. Might have a bruised kidney. We'll deal with that later. Head wound's pretty superficial. No blood in the ears. The leg's the worst of it." And that, he thought, was bad enough. Saving it and the dog was going to be tricky. "I need to move him into surgery." He glanced back, saw that Piney had dropped into the chair and had his head on his knees. "I need your hands, Faith. I'm going to lift and carry him. You have to stay with me. Keep the pressure firm. He's lost too much blood. Ready?" "Oh, but wait, let's go." She did what she was told because he left her no choice. She jogged beside him, fumbling for the door with her free hand. Bee sent up a joyful bark and ran between her feet. "Sit," Wade said so sharply Bee's butt plopped obediently to the floor. The minute he'd laid the sedated dog down, he grabbed a thick apron, tossed it to Faith. "Put that on. I've got to get pictures." "Pictures?" "X-rays. Go to his head. Hold him steady as you can." The apron weighed like lead, but she dragged it on, did what she was told. Mongo's eyes were slitted, but it seemed to her he was watching her, pleading with her to help. "It's going to be all right, baby. Wade's going to make everything all right. You'll see." The sound of her voice had Bee whining and scooting over to huddle by her feet. "Get rid of the apron now." While he waited for the film to develop, Wade shot out orders. "Come back here and apply pressure again. Keep talking to him. Just let him hear your voice." "Okay, all right, Swallowing what tasted like bile, she pressed the thick padding over the gash. "Wade's going to fix you up just fine again. You have to look both ways before you cross the street. You remember that next time." "Oh, Wade, is he going to die?" "Not if I can help it." He slapped the x-rays onto a lighted panel, nodded grimly. "Not if I can help it," he said again, and started gathering instruments. Sharp silver tools glinted in the hard overhead light. Her head seemed to circle in time with her stomach. "You're going to operate now, just like that?" "I have to try to save the leg." "Save it? You mean just do what I say and don't think." When he peeled back the compress, her stomach gave a nasty lurch, but he didn't give her time to be sick. "You hold this. Press this button here when I tell you I need suction. You can do that one-handed. When I need an instrument, I'll describe it. Give it to me handle first. I'm going to knock him out now." He lowered the light, cleaned the field. All Faith could hear now was the slurping noises of her hose when he demanded suction, the click and clatter of tools. She averted her eyes, wanted to keep them that way, but he kept snapping out orders that required her to look. Before long, it was like a movie. Wade's head was bent, his eyes cool and calm, though she saw beads of sweat purling on his forehead. It seemed to her his hands were like magic, moving so delicately through blood, flesh, and bone. She didn't even blink when he slid the protruding bone back into place. None of it was real. She watched him suture impossibly tiny stitches inside the gash. The raw yellow of the sterile wash he'd used stained his hands, mixed with the blood until it was all the color of an aging bruise. "I need you to check his heart rate manually. Just use your hand, gauge his heartbeat for me." "It's kind of slow," she said when she pressed down, "but it seems steady, like bump, bump, bump." "Good. Take a look at his eyes. Pupils are awfully big. Any blood in the whites?" "No, I don't think so." "Okay, he needs some pins in this leg. Bone shattered more than broke. Once that's done, I'll close it, then we'll set the leg." "Is he going to be all right?" "He's healthy." Wade used his forearm to wipe his brow. "And he's young. He's got a good chance to keep this leg." He worried about bone chips. Had he gotten them all? There'd been muscle damage, some badly ripped tendons, but he felt confident he'd repaired the worst of it. All this ran through one part of his mind while the rest was focused on securing bone with steel. I'll know better in a day or two. I need gauze and tape, that cabinet there. Once he'd closed the wound, Wade bandaged and set the leg, then checked the dog's vitals himself. He treated the raw scrapes on the muzzle and behind the left ear. He held up, Wade murmured, then for the first time in over an hour looked directly at Faith. So did you. Yeah, well, I was a little queasy at first, then she lifted her hands, started a gesture. They were streaked with blood, as was her blouse. Oh my, was all she managed before her eyes rolled back. He caught her barely, then stretched her out on the floor. She was already coming around when he lifted her head and brought a paper cup of water to her lips. What happened? You fainted, gracefully and at a convenient moment. He brushed his lips over her cheek. I'll take you upstairs. You can clean up and lie down for a bit. I'm all right. But when he helped her stand, her legs wobbled. Okay, maybe not. I might be better off flat out for a while longer. She dropped her head on his shoulder, half floating as he carried her up. I don't think I'm cut out to be a nurse. You did great. No, you did. I never understood why you do what you do. Always figured it as giving out shots and cleaning up dog poop. Well, there's a lot of that. He carried her into the bathroom where he could brace her on the sink and run warm water in the bowl. Just put your hands in here. You'll feel better when they're clean. There's a lot more, Wade, to what you do, and to you. Her eyes met his in the mirror. I haven't been paying attention, haven't bothered to look close enough. You saved a life today. You're a hero. I did what I was trained to do. I know what I saw, and what I saw was heroic. She turned, kissed him. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to strip to the skin and get in the shower. You steady enough? Yeah, I'm fine. You go check on your patient. I love you, Faith. I think you do, she said quietly, and it's nicer than I expected. Go on now, my head's still light enough for me to say something I'll regret later. I'll be back up when I can. He checked on Mongo first, then cleaned up before stepping out into the examining room. Piney was still in the chair, and now Bee was curled sleeping in his lap. Wade had forgotten about both of them. That dog gonna make it? Looks good. Oh, Jesus, Wade, I'm just sick about it. I've been going over it in my head, and if I'd been paying more attention, I was just driving along, my mind was wandering, and next thing I knew that dog jumped right out in the road. Could have been a kid. It wasn't your fault. Hit me a deer a time or two. Don't know why it didn't bother me like this. Mostly I'd just get pissed off. Deer can do a hell of a number on a truck. Some kid's gonna come home from school looking for that dog. I know the owner. I'll give her a call. You getting him here fast made a big difference. That's what you ought to remember. Yeah, well. He sighed hugely. This little gal's right cute, he said, stroking Bee's head. She came out here looking for trouble, chewed on my bootlaces for a bit, then she conked right out. I appreciate you looking out for her. Wade reached down and picked her up. Bee yawned hugely, then licked at the cat scratches on his hand. Are you going to be all right? Yeah. Tell the God's truth, I'm going to go get me a drink. Cade's probably sent out the Marines for me by now, but that's just going to have to wait. He got to his feet. You let me know how that dog goes on now, will you? Sure. He slapped Piney's shoulder as they walked out. The waiting room was clear. Wade imagined most of his patients got tired of the delay and left. He could only be grateful for the quiet. He set Bee down with one of the dog treats Maxine kept in her desk drawer, then looked up Sherry Bellow's number in his files. The answering machine picked up, so he left a message. She'd be out looking for her dog, he supposed. More than likely, she'd run into someone who'd seen the accident. He left it at that and went back in to Mongo. Minutes after Wade talked to Sherry's machine, Tori listened to the same cheery voice announcing she wasn't able to come to the phone. "Sherry, this is Tori Bodine at Southern Comfort. I'd like you to call or come by when you get a chance. If you're still interested, you've got a job." The decision felt good, Tori thought as she replaced the receiver. Not only had Sherry's references been glowing, but it might even be fun to have a bright face and willing hands around the shop for a few hours a week. Business was slow today, but she wasn't discouraged. It took time to establish yourself, to become part of people's routines, and she'd had a handful of browsers that morning. She used the downtime to work out an affordable schedule for her new employee. She got out the forms she'd need to fill out for tax records and added the list of store policies she'd typed. She toyed with the wording for an ad in the Sunday paper that would include the linen she'd decided to carry. When her bells chimed, she looked up quickly with the same bump in the heart she'd experienced at the sound all day. But the sight of Abigail Lawrence made her set down her pen and smile. "What a nice surprise! Told you I'd find my way here. Tori, this is just lovely. You have beautiful things. We have some very talented artists, and you know just how to display their work." Abigail held out a hand as Tori came around the counter. "I'm going to have a wonderful time spending money here." "Well, don't let me stop you. Can I get you anything, a cold drink, a cup of tea?" "No, not a thing." "Oh, is that batik?" Abigail crossed over to admire a framed portrait of a young woman standing on a garden path. "She does wonderful work. I have a few of her scarves in stock as well." "I'll have to take a look. I want to see everything. But I can tell you I want this batik. It's perfect for my husband to give me for our anniversary." Amused, Tori turned to lift it from the wall. "And does he want it gift-wrapped?" "Naturally. How long have you been married?" Abigail cocked her head as Tori carried the batik to the counter. In all the time she'd been Tori's lawyer, she never remembered her asking a personal question. 26 years. "So you were married at 10? Abigail beamed, examined a box of polished burl wood. "Shopkeeping agrees with you." She carried the box to the counter herself. "I think this town does, too. You're at home here." "Yes, this is home. Abigail, did you really come up from Charleston to shop?" "That, and to see you, and to talk to you." Tori nodded. "If you found out more about the girl who was murdered, you don't have to ease me into it." "I didn't learn any more about her, but I did ask my friend to do that check on light crimes that had taken place during the last 2 weeks of August. There are others." "You already knew?" "No, felt, feared." "How many more?" "3 that fit the profile and time frame. A 12-year-old girl who went missing during a family trip to Hilton Head in August 1986. A 19-year-old co-ed taking summer classes at the university in Charleston in August 1993. And a 26-year-old woman who'd been camping with friends in Sumter National Forest, August 1999. "So many," Tori whispered.